Okay, so I'm planning on watching Elvis tomorrow, and I was listening to the Keep It podcast, and they mention that Dagger Montgomery is playing Steve Binder, and Steve Binder is the director of the thing we watched in the previous episode that we recorded, and he's also like the director of Elvis's like big comeback special. So it's wild.
Who's Steve Binder?
The director of the thing that we last watched for this podcast, but a future episode.
Okay.
I'm gonna write it in the chat.
Yeah, no, I know what you're referring to. I'm just like, I thought you expected me to know that name, and I didn't.
That's why I said he's the director of the previous thing that we recorded, but will be a future episode.
Okay.
And it's wild that he's in the Elvis movie and that he's played by Dagger Montgomery of Stranger Things fame.
Okay, who is Decker Montgomery? Was he Billy?
He's the Billy, yeah.
Okay.
It is like, that's just a wild bunch of information that I've learned.
Yeah. So, should we get started? Hello and welcome to It's Giving Camp. I'm Saffron.
And I'm Fabiola.
And
today we're going to be talking about the documentary The Queen from 1968.
I didn't realize until I started watching this that it was a documentary. For some reason, I thought it was a fiction film. But I'm glad that it's a documentary because it was really interesting. And I feel like, so it's kind of a short film. It's only an hour. So I feel like there's a fair amount to talk about the film itself, but also I know you've done some research on like queer history and drag history before, in the era before Stonewall, and I'd love to hear more about that.
So I took a bunch of notes from this article called Drag in the San Francisco Gay Liberation Movement from 1964 through 1972 by Betty Luther Hillman. And it's just an article specifically about what queer activism in the pre-Stonewall era looks like. And even though it's specifically talking about San Francisco doesn't exist in a vacuum. So I think we can assume that like a lot of the conversations they were having were being had in other cities in the US. So basically what I learned is that discourse is a flat circle.
That sounds about right. In what specific ways is discourse a flat circle?
So there are like these 4 different main groups of activism, and they did activism in different ways. There's the Society for Individual Rights, or SIR, which, even though drag played a major role in the organization's social and cultural events, it was mostly just relegated to like those events specifically and not anywhere else, and wasn't really like a focus for their activism or advocacy for gay rights. And there was the Mattachine Society, which had dress codes requiring suits for men and dresses for women at official functions.
Ooh.
And they underscored how gender normative presentation was a central tactic in the quest for rights and respectability.
Okay.
And there was also the Vanguard, which recognized that due to their gender presentation, they were not completely included in SIR's political advocacy, nor in its definition of gay community. And there was also, lastly, the Committee for Homosexual Freedom, which was more militant and actively labeled themselves as liberationists, and that means that they argue that homosexual oppression was connected to broader social hierarchies of race, class, and gender. But because they were really militant, they rejected the stereotypes of like quote unquote weak homosexuals, which just meant that they had little room to include drag queens and gender transgression in their politics. And the article of flyer by the San Francisco and Berkeley Gay Liberation, which stated that the gay establishment is doing as much to delay our freedom as 1,000 repression laws on the statute books. And from like this type of activism that's seen in this flyer, not only were drag queens included in this type of gay activism, but gender transgression in dress and self-presentation was adopted as a public political tactic. And with campy dress, including drag, challenged notions of gender by proving that masculinity and femininity were not naturally tied to males and females. And the article kind of ends by stating that while drag remained a marker of gay community and subculture, its social and political meaning was contested and indeed continues to be debated among gay activists today.
I think it's interesting in talking about like drag and gender nonconformity as politics. I find that really interesting because in the conversation with the Queen, because it's the focus of the documentary isn't explicitly political. It's a beauty pageant. It's a contest. And there isn't even like much talk about from in the scenes where contestants are just talking and hanging out with each other. There isn't even much talk about like oppression that they face. In some cases it is, but as this is not to get like too deep or complicated right off the bat, but like I understand that like gay people, queer people, their lives, our lives are inherently political because there are people who see us as non-normative no matter what. And so our very existence is a statement to them. And I do think that there is power in that. To exist and to live your life and to be happy can be revolutionary. But I also do find it frustrating in some ways to that like people just wanting to express themselves is automatically assumed to be political. From what we get to see in the Queen, we don't get any indication that like it's that the contest itself is about politics for the organizers or the contestants, do we?
No, not really, but there's this one line that I wrote down like at the beginning of the contest in which Sabrina, the organizer and host of the event, says every one of these contestants is a winner.
Well, I think that's logistically they all were winners of local contests, and then they're coming to this like all American contest.
But like also they're winners by just being there and being contestants in this pageant.
Yeah. I think it is also another thing that's like interesting. Okay, like to understand the cultural context of this moment is really important, you know, to understand that like or I was reading a Rolling Stone article from 2019, talking about the Queen, and in it mentioned that Sabrina had been arrested over 100 times for uh like crimes related to drag and quote unquote cross dressing.
And in a Vogue article, they mentioned that like she was arrested 3 times while promoting the movie. So only in promoting the movie she got arrested 3 times.
That like awareness that it was could be very like physically and mentally like unsafe, like lawfully unsafe for these performers was like on my mind when watching the film. And there was even like a small reference to like, oh, we have to like finding a hotel that has enough space and is also, I think the quote was, hip enough, to let us do that. That was mentioned. I was aware of that, but there doesn't seem to be, there isn't any fear. There isn't any anger or frustration or like that sense of politics. How do I say this? Like, it doesn't come through that what they could be doing is dangerous, because they're doing it because it's fun, and they're doing it because they enjoy it, and they do it because it's their lives. And I think as a young queer person myself, sometimes I have this impression that pre-Stonewall, or even post-Stonewall, in moments pre the last 20 years in contemporary society, I don't even know, what does contemporary mean? That's a side note. I have this impression that like it's always been hard to be a gay person, and I guess I just don't know many examples of queer joy from history. Like, that's not been something that I've seen or been taught about, because queer history period is not taught, I feel like. And so even in what does get talked about, you get to hear about the AIDS crisis, and that's like, oh my god, it's so awful, and so seeing this film made me really emotional. This is my first time watching it for this podcast, and there's just a couple of these small scenes where I don't even know their all of their names, but the documentary focuses on a couple of the hotel rooms where a couple of the queens are staying together, and there's this one group, and they just have this conversation that like it starts off talking about the draft, and then they're talking about, because Vietnam War was going on at the time. Whoa, hello. That's another like small moment of like a little bit of politics trickle in, but then they like talk about kind of like, they talk about gender and sexuality in this like frankly like honest way. And there's multiple just casual mentions of like, oh yeah, my husband, or oh yeah, my partner, that really like, I feel like it shouldn't have made me so emotional, but it did. It was like, oh my god, yeah, this is like 1967, and these are these people just like have these full lives, and for the most part are really happy. There was one who's talking about his the 500 like people small town that he came from, where it's like, oh yeah, everyone knows me, everyone appreciates me, my mom loves me, and it's just like, oh no, acceptance and love has existed. It's not a new phenomenon. I don't know that was my little emotional ramble.
Yeah, like this is like a really valuable historical document, like not just for like the big picture, but also by just like hearing these guys like call their partners their husband or whatever, or like as you said, that one guy who was like, yeah, in my small town, like everyone knows me and everyone loves me, and they've known that I'm gay since I was like 5.
Yeah. Okay, like I'm anti-war, so I think them talking about the draft was super interesting because I was like, yeah, damn right, you like don't have to go fight because you know you're gay. But it was also really interesting. There was the one of them was like, oh, I want to serve my country, I want to protect my country, and they didn't let me, and that didn't feel fair. And like there's also genuinely kind of like, I don't know why I'm saying genuine feels like it's an interesting word I'm realizing I'm using, because it is in this case where it's a documentary, they knew they were being filmed, and there isn't anything like wrong with exaggerated performance, with a knowledge of the camera affecting what you talk about and how you talk about things. But the way that they do talk about things had the emotional resonance to me, had the feeling that they would be saying those things if the camera wasn't there, which is a stark contrast to the rest of the movie, which is about performance, which is about the contest.
Wouldn't it be a hell of a mess if the draft board would call us right now to come down for a physical?
This is what I'm. This is what I'm.
been drafted?
This is what I'm wearing to the draft board.
You've already been drafted, haven't you?
Of course not. I'm not old enough. Well, you know, this friend of mine went to the draft board. Well, I was just talking to him, and I said, why haven't you been drafted? And he said, well, I have been. And I said, well, did you tell them that you were homosexual? He said, no, they told me.
Oh, my Lord.
Is there specific moments that really specific moments of, say, vulnerability that, or more of the quote unquote authentic moments that stood out to you, that in comparison to more, say, campy moments? Not to say that camp can't be authentic, but
I'm just thinking about that one person who had the list of all the contestants and like where they should stand, and just like ordering them around.
Oh, I loved all of the backstage show business part of it. It gave me flashbacks to high school theater, and like the techies being like, okay, and the stage manager just being like, okay, you need to be here, you need to be here. Where is that prop? We need to be ready. Like that. Yeah, I agree that also felt very like. I think there's even a moment where he's like, get him up. Like he tells like the camera person like to be like, can you move? I need them to line up. He's like, no, just disregard the documentary crew for a moment.
There was another moment with him where they're talking about Rachel Harlow, and where he's like, she won the first contest she ever entered. Like she doesn't know what it's like to work for these things.
Oh, I thought Sabrina was saying that.
I'm pretty sure it was Joey, who we believe might be Joey.
Yeah, the stage manager person.
Yeah, which I like felt that comment was really authentic, but it also speaks to the camp of drag and the camp of putting in effort.
What exactly do you mean by that, the camp of putting in effort?
This very much leads to like the big famous moment of this documentary, which is Crystal's rant at the end.
We have to talk about it. It's
yeah,
it's the most like culturally known part of the film.
Yeah. But Crystal basically, like, while in the rant, she basically says that Harlow doesn't seem to like put as much effort into her drag as her, like she was saying that she looks awful. And I will say Rachel's wig was awful. It looked weird at the back. But anyways.
Well, it wasn't even her wig, right? That was part of the whole drama
Yeah.
that she didn't have a wig and then was trying to get a new wig. And I liked the dress. I thought the dress was really pretty.
Yeah.
But I get it. There wasn't. I see what you mean. Where the moments that we see her, there's not a performance the way some of the other queens have. She just kind of is standing there. Is that what you think is part of kind of the idea of the effort versus?
Yeah, it's both just standing there, but also crafting the image as well. Because Crystal had way better makeup and a way better wig and way better outfits, and she still got like, I think, third runner up or something.
I feel like, okay, there's so much to talk about at this moment, right? The thing that's being like not like directly addressed, but is definitely part of this conversation is race.
Yeah. Like the first two that got like fourth and third runner up were both darker skinned contestants.
And Miss Chicago, Miss Alfonso, also gorgeous. I was like, honestly, she was my pick of what we saw of all the queens. I was like, she was my pick to win first place. But one of the things that I find interesting is that in all of these articles that I'm reading talking about the queen and talking about, this moment with Crystal LaBeija. Wait, how do you say the house of
LaBeija, I think.
Yeah. So talking about Crystal LaBeija, there's quotes like storms off, leaves the stage in a huff. In the film, from what we see, she just walks. She doesn't say anything, at least not anything that we hear. It's just walks off, walks down the aisle and leaves. And there's some like Sabrina on the mic is just like, oh, Crystal, like, don't be all temperamental. The rant later on camera, clearly upset, clearly worked up, but she isn't like it wasn't a big deal. Like actually walking off the stage is not a moment. And it feels like, I'm like, this is, why does everyone recounting after the fact make it sound like the actual leaving of the stage make it sound like a bigger deal than it was? I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. I'll just say that.
Crystal, where are you going? This is not the time to show temperament. Get back here and stay with the other finalists. Oh, well, you've got to expect losses. Okay, we've got to continue with the business at hand.
Do you want to talk about the rant itself more?
Yeah, so I did not write everything down, but I do remember like specific things that she says, like, I know I'm beautiful. And she also said something along the lines of like, she, like, in one moment she speaks directly to Rachel and like she goes like, yes, you are beautiful, but you didn't put as much effort into it, basically.
Yeah. It doesn't feel like she's tearing Rachel down. She's just like, this is about like how this is actually being judged. An actual, like, this is a beauty contest. Your dress should have been dry cleaned. Like, I think that's one of the lines. And like, again, I want to talk about this, like the fact that this is a documentary. All of the contestants, I'm sure, all of the participants are aware of their image and how their image is going to be used. And to me, like, that seems like a very, like, especially as like as a Black drag queen, like, that's probably a line that she's aware that she has to walk.
But I feel like at the end, by by kind of refusing to walk that line with her rant, like in the end, like she was kind of right to cross it, because how productive is that line?
Yeah, like I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Like it she felt like there was like an injustice and it was frustrating and she was going to speak on it. One of the things that Crystal like talks about in the rant that I think is interesting is the use of like is money in the use of her image. And she's like, I do not want my image to be used. I don't want Sabrina profiting off of my image in relation to this contest. And what I'm like,
and she also kind of accuses the contest to be rigged by saying that like Sabrina and Rachel are close and that this is essentially PR.
Oh, absolutely. Like that's one of the main accusations, that it's not just that it's unfair, which is then also like then of course it's so interesting because then Sabrina comes in and is like, well, you can talk to any of the judges, like you're going to a party afterwards, you can see the judges, you can tell them your opinion and ask them if it was rigged. But I don't know. I think it's interesting to be talking about, like, I don't want my image to be like I don't want Sabrina to profit off my image, but also has the awareness to know that Crystal was know that she was being filmed in that moment for the documentary, and like that control over. I wonder how much control she knew that she had in that moment. And I mean, whether she knew it or not, it paid off, because that rant and that kind of performance is one of, it's probably the most iconic thing that came out of this film. And it's been referenced, it was sampled in Frank Ocean album. It was the Snatch Game episode of season 3 of RuPaul's Drag Race had Aja playing. Is it Aja or?
I think I've heard it pronounced Aja.
I think it's Aja. I said as soon as I said Aja, I was like, that's not right. This is it was a cultural moment that stands out. And then of course, like Crystal goes on to help found,
House of LaBeija.
Yeah, House of LaBeija. So it's like, I don't know. I just think it's really, I'm not sure if I'm expressing my like, I'm sure you as the connoisseur of camp love this moment for all it means in terms of like the campiness. And part of how it becomes a meme is part of the campiness. But I'm also just like, God, this is a moment of, it's also just a moment of queer history.
Yeah, I do think that adds to the camp of that moment. The fact that it's like, that you can absolutely interpret it as political and a big moment of queer history is a big part of the camp, and not just the drama of the moment and her amazing outfit.
Yeah, because that's like you said before, it's all about the layers. There's the layers of just the there's the I get it. I love it.
Sue the bitch. Did you sign I will sue. No, I didn't sign any release. And if she releases any picture on me, I will sue the fool. She won't make money off of my name, darling. She can make it off of Harlow and all the rest of the fools that will flock to her. But not Crystal, darling. Anybody but her. You can take all the pictures you want of me, but I better not see them on the street because it's over. Get a picture with me and Harlow and we'll see which is more beautiful, darling.
Did you make note of one of the performances that we saw in rehearsal, but not in the actual like final pageant or contest? Was the what's the actual song called? The Grand Old Flag. The one where they have all the American flags.
I don't know the name of the song, but I recognize that it was patriotic, but it also felt like a kind of a dance remix of a patriotic song. And I did take note of that. And I was like, oh, wow, gay people have been remixing for a long time.
Well, I was like, I want to talk about this moment. I noted it down because it was like, especially in context with the conversation about the draft and the war, I'm like, how much of this moment is a mockery? How much of this moment is a parody?
Yeah.
Because, and we didn't get to see what their costumes would have been like, which that's another thing. I'm like, oh God, I would have seen the whole pageantry, because we just get to see them practicing the dance, but like they got these big American flags, and I'm like,
Yeah, I do wish we could have seen that performance, because we still don't get like the full picture to interpret it.
yeah. But there's this irony of them being like this big patriotic dance and song and flags and the red, white, and blue, when we also know there was conversation about how they couldn't be allowed to serve in the army because they're gay or because they're too feminine. Like there is this knowledge that who they are as people is perceived as not American, and yet here they are putting on this like big like American performance. I love it. I wish we could have gotten more of that moment, because to me it reads as parody.
Yeah, I feel like it could be interpreted as either like parody or like a kind of statement of like, no, we are American. Like it kind of depends on like I'm just interpreting this in the context of the article that I read, because a lot of activist groups were trying to like assert how they belonged in this society. Meanwhile, other groups are like, no, it's this society that's wrong and we need to help shape it into a better society.
And I guess we don't know unless there had been interviews with like the individual performers in that moment. It could have meant different things to different people participating at the same time. Did you read at all about at what point lip sync became part of like drag culture and performance? Because it makes sense that like it hasn't always existed.
My reference point for that would be whenever Mommy Dearest came out, which was the late 80s, because I have heard that like with that movie, a lot of drag queens would like lip sync her lines.
Yeah.
Make mixes of her lines by like Faye Dunaway playing Joe Crawford, and like would mix a bunch of her dialogue in that movie. So for my point of reference, the late 80s.
I mean, that makes sense because that's also when like the technology probably became more available of like probably they would use cassettes, right?
Yeah.
It's you know new history for me that part of drag performance in like the 60s at least that we see, it was like, oh, you sing and you talk in your own, well, not your own voice, that's part of the performance, but like it's not a recording that you're lip syncing along to. You sing in falsetto, you sing, you talk in a high pitch, and I like that. I think that's fun, and also kind of it's cool to see that kind of a different talent being flexed.
Yeah, and like there are still like drag queens to sing, but I feel like one of the strong points of lip syncing is that you already have the like intonation and speed recorded. You don't have to try to make it just exactly like how this person said or sang the line or whatever.
You know, maybe we should, if we know any drag queens or performers, we should ask, or if anyone, there's any drag queens who end up listening to the show. I would love to hear some of their voices, because I obviously know that we can learn about this history and talk about it, having read about it and seen it, but part of me does feel like a little bit, I guess, out of my depth, and or not out of my depth, but I'm just like, this is a spot that I know less about. Let's see, what are there other things to talk about? Okay, I love the accents. I love the accents in this film. Like not even in the performance, just like in the straight up, like the moments where they're like sitting around.
People don't talk like that anymore.
No, and I'm like, is it like, I can't even, like, I'm so bad at like placing things. I'm like, is that like a New York accent, or is it just like a gay accent, or is it like, it definitely, like, they, like, you know, Sabrina or, you know, Jack's narration is this just this voice, this character that feels very it definitely feels more feminine.
I did
but
love
also
Sabrina's presence on stage.
Yeah,
like I did love her presence on stage with the mic and her glasses,
the little glasses. Yeah. I also love that one of the first like is it the first scene we get is him calling his mom, being like, hey, you should come see the show. just take the, you know, just take a cab to this, you know, this address. Another like thing that just feels like very like domestic and natural. I'm assuming since like Sabrina was the narrator, and then the credits was listed as like additional advice or something, that like, did she like commission the film, or like, do you know at all like the origins of like how it came about? Like, I don't know anything about the director.
I didn't find the origin, but yeah, like I did know that it was directed by Frank Simon, and it screened at the International Critics Week of the 1968 Cannes Film Festival.
Yeah,
so,
it was at Cannes. But it was also didn't actually get it like screened at Cannes, but then also didn't, because it was the year of there were student protests. I read that on Wikipedia. It looks like a super small production team, honestly, based on the credits. Like three main camera, 2 additional camera, like 2 sound people.
And like some of the shots, like especially backstage, like you could kind of feel how tiny the camera was, and like in the weird angles that they had to get in to like capture like a dress or a shoe or something. They had to like, it looked like they were like kind of curling, like from what I'm assuming that the camera people were doing, it kind of looked like they were like curling up in a corner or something.
Yeah, I mean, look, I've been backstage I've not been at like that specific like town hall location or whatever, but I've been backstage at theaters in New York, and it's small. There's not a lot of room. That's another thing that I do love, just like not only getting to see like the queer history, but getting to see like the documentary history too, even if this is, you know, kind of the fly on the wall kind of filmmaking. We don't get to see any involvement from the crew. You have a feeling that they're there. You due to those tight spaces and camera angles, you get this sense that they're there. And I think even in the Crystal rant, do we hear from the camera person, or do we hear someone behind the camera, or is it another contestant?
I'm not entirely sure, but to me it did seem like someone in the lighting crew was trying to better light Crystal.
Yeah.
Like I did notice some like lighting movement during that scene.
It doesn't necessarily feel staged, but for the most part, the sequence of the night is expected. So the documentary crew probably knew where they were supposed to be at all times, and that's the one moment that is out of unexpected, that is kind of unscheduled, and so the actual filming of it does feel more like frantic and like just like
because they're trying to make the footage look visually good.
Yeah,
because this was unplanned.
And that like is also just, that's part of the fun, I think, to feel that that if the documentary crew is a little bit rushed, but then Crystal herself is like present and in the moment and gorgeous in her makeup and gown. She was the one in control in that scene.
And she was robbed.
I mean, I have sympathy for Rachel because she does seem so young.
Yeah.
But also, there is that scene earlier where she's like throwing a little bit of a fit and like in bed and like, I'm just gonna go to sleep. And I think the
and
stage...
like that's the moment where they're like, yeah, she just hasn't worked for any of these contests. Like the first one she entered, she won.
Yeah. So who would you say is the camp icon of this film?
Crystal, absolutely. Because she has the glamour and she has the politics.
I am doing it bad, but I have a right to show my color, darling. I am beautiful, and I know I'm beautiful.
Don't talk about she's showing no color.
May I say this to you?
Taking the wrong way. Shit, she looks bad. And no way of what you they can do about it. Look at Harlow's outfit. That is funny. Don't bother her. Don't bother her. It's not Harlow's fault. It's not her fault.
I know it's not her fault.
Harlow, she can't help it because you're beautiful and you're young. You deserve to have the best in life, but you didn't deserve. Miss C, I don't say she's not beautiful, but she wasn't looking beautiful tonight. She doesn't equal me. Look at her makeup. It's terrible.
Is there any other moments you'd like to talk about?
I did think it was like interesting and notable how Harlow as like out of drag as Richard presented, because even though she was technically out of drag, she still dressed and presented differently from the rest of the people in this documentary.
And I think she did come out as a transition as a transgender woman later, at least according to the Rolling Stone article that I read. Let me find this.
It also makes sense why Rachel's drag presentation looks like that, because she does look like much more naturalistically feminine and not like drag feminine as the other contestants.
There's actually this great quote I want to read from the Rolling Stone article that says, from Rachel, that says, without Jack Dorshow, our flawless Sabrina, my friend and mentor, the Queen, would not exist. Because of his absolute dedication to the art of drag, he championed a whole generation of us who were, until that time, silenced by intolerance and shame, and delivered us from the darkness into the light.
Oh,
yeah, like it is this kind of like, for all of the layers, one of that layers is a kind of this pure expression of, you know, getting to be yourself and finding a community, which I find really sweet. Is that where we're ending it? I guess, or is there anything else you want to say?
I think kind of both justice for Crystal and for Harlow.
Yeah.
For different reasons.
Yeah, you know what? I think someone's always gonna get robbed.
Yeah.
And like Sabrina said, all of them are winners.
Yeah.
And that's where we end it. You can find us on Twitter at GivingCampPod.
And on Instagram at It's Giving Camp Pod.
And that's all lowercase, one word. Our theme music that you are listening to right now is by Harrison Lurie. I'm Saffron Heftegau, and I'm online at GalbHefta.
And I'm Fabiola Liano, and you can find me on Twitter at Fabiola_Liano. Shout out to our patron, Nicole Veneto.
Thank you so much for listening, and if you enjoy our podcast, please recommend it to your friends. Give us a rating online.